All right. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine Sunday show. We do this every Sunday at 6 o'clock Eastern, whatever time that might be in your neck of the woods. And today is March the 15th, 2015. Oh, March the 15th. This is,
Sides.
yeah, Lovecraft's death anniversary, isn't it?
That's
So,
true.
okay, a couple things. We're waiting on Jesse Bullington, who's the editor of Letters to Lovecraft, and your copy will not look like that. But we're going to give away, Jesse's going to give away one of these. As always, we try to give away stuff on the show. And I still have these to give away, so I'm going to give away one of these from the ladies at Littlest Lovecraft. It's littlestlovecraft.com. There's Jesse.
There we go.
And there he is. And we have Molly Tanzer on the show. She has long hair now. And a new book coming out soon. And Jesse Bullington. How's it going, Jesse?
Very good. Sorry I'm late. Technical difficulties, but I think I have them
Oh,
sorted.
no, you're fine. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
All right, so I want to talk about Letters to Lovecraft, and then Molly's here, so we can talk about her story, too, and a little bit later we can talk about her upcoming book, too. So that's good. All right, so this is kind of an unusual idea, which is good. Can you tell us how this came about and what the idea was? You sent out, I'm sure you sent out an email to authors that you asked to submit and said, okay, here's what I have in mind. Can you talk about all that?
Yeah, certainly. I was actually approached by Simon, who is the publisher of Stone Skin Press. They had this idea in place, and it was a really neat idea. I'd worked with them before. They have published my short fiction 3 or 4 times in the past, and I know they have published Molly's fiction as well. They actually, Stone Skin is the fiction imprint of Pelgrane Press, which may be known to role-playing fans for their 13th Age role-playing game, as well as Hillfolk and a few other systems. So when Simon contacted me about it, I jumped at the chance because I, A, liked working with them, but also, B, it was a really neat idea. I've been a fan of Lovecraft for, at this point, longer than I haven't. I came to him pretty young. And, of course, that essay is something that I think everyone who's a diehard Lovecraft fan comes to at some point or another. Supernatural horror and literature is
Right.
something. If you like Lovecraft, there's a good chance that sooner or later you're going to pick this up. And I remember in high school coming to that essay and it being this sort of primer for me and my friends reading for the next few years of like, oh, like we love Lovecraft and we love his peers, but in terms of, you know, the essay does function as a sort of survey of genre fiction, weird fiction, up until his point. And so we went back and, you know, that's how we discovered, not Poe, of course, but some of the lesser known Arthur Machen and Algernon Blackwood. And so the idea was, because Lovecraft is obviously so influential, and because so many projects come out that play in the mythos, why not do something a little bit different? And instead of just working with the fictions Lovecraft created, why not kind of get to the heart of his philosophy? And the premise of the anthology, and I've got a copy here, was to have people read the essay and choose a quote that they thought really resonated with their personal ethos in terms of writing. Just as a broad example, you know, this is the essay where we find the quote, fear is, or what is it? Fear is the oldest and strongest emotion known to
Right.
mankind, and
Right.
the strongest is fear of the unknown. So, in theory, someone could take that quote and say, well, that is the heart of my personal philosophy about writing. So, I'm going to write a story that embodies that idea, that the fear of the unknown is the most powerful thing out there. Or, conversely, someone could take that same quote and write an essay about how, well, that's totally ridiculous. I don't agree with that at all. I think the strangest, most frightening thing of all is the known. So maybe you set, you know, horror at the holidays with the family or something like that. So we got a really great range of responses from people, all kind of taking different quotes. It's interesting, too, to see which authors chose the same quote, because 2 or 3 of the quotes in the book were the same author chose them, and then they wrote very, very different stories because obviously. But I think I
Were
scared
you
anyone off.
afraid that half of the authors would pick that really well-known quote, or?
None of them did. I think I may have scared them off because in my query letter I said, "Well, this is the obvious quote," and no one ended up taking it. People ended up taking
Did
slightly.
you say something like, "No, if you're a bad author and you have no imagination, go ahead and use that quote"?
It wasn't quite as discouraging as that, but I definitely, encourage people like, revisit the essay because, I don't necessarily want like 18. I think, a lot of the Lovecraftian fiction that's come after Lovecraft, that's, you could take that as, the sound bite that they're responding to in some way or another. I mean, that's kind of the heart of cosmic horror, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the essay's deep. I mean, it's huge. It's as long, or maybe even longer, I think, than The Shadows over Innsmouth. So it's not a small essay. It's of a great enough body that there's so much still to be mined. I mean, they could probably do a series of a dozen of these and get very interesting responses and very different responses, I think.
Yeah. Everybody else here, please feel free to jump in with questions or comments for Jesse. But I just, for the person that looks at this book on Amazon or wherever and says, "Oh, I'm thinking of picking this up," would you describe these as cosmic horror stories, or it sounds like not, but what would your answer to that be?
Well, it depends.
He's probably thinking, he or she is probably thinking, oh, these are going to be Lovecraftian stories, which I don't think is probably the case. They're stories based on the essay.
It really depends, because the main thing I didn't want was necessarily to get 18 pieces of pastiche, because there's a lot out there and a lot of it is really, really good. But again, I think it's something that, in the case of many of the authors in this book, I'd seen them mine before. I asked authors who I knew had worked in that playground extensively. And so some of the stories are definitely cosmic horror, and some of them are very overt in their Lovecraftian reference. Angela Slatter's story, just to name one off the top of my head, takes place around the environs of Arkham. And so we are definitely in Lovecraft's world. And Molly's story, for example, which I'm sure she'll be talking about, again, definitely has a very strong cosmic horror element to it. But then certain other stories, Paul Tremblay's or Brian Evanson's, are, I don't want to say quieter, but I think they definitely found things in the essay to draw on and create something that I think is maybe, it's interesting. I think all of them are responding to Lovecraft, but not all of them are Lovecraftian. And so it created a very disparate book where some of the stories are, completely, definitely wedded to Lovecraft's mythos, and the horror there is that sort of man's insignificance and railing against these forces greater than they could imagine. But then other stories are, again, very quiet and of a very different mode. And I'd like to think that Lovecraft would at least find them interesting for their differences as well as their homages to his canon.
For the audience, Matthew just told me that he's got 2 extra copies of Letters to Lovecraft, so we're going to give away a total of 3. So thanks for that, Matt. Also give away the coin too. So we got 4 winners today. Since we have Molly here, let me jump over to Molly for a second. You mentioned her story. Molly, would you mind talking about why you chose the particular passage that you chose and a little bit about your story? Spoiler free about your story.
Sure. I actually think I changed my passage at the last minute because other people had chosen one. But the passage I chose was, because I have my copy right here. Much of the choicest weird work is unconscious, appearing in memorable fragments scattered through material whose mass effect may be of a very different cast. And I guess what struck me about that is that as I sat down to write this, I had just returned from London, where I went to World Fantasy a couple of years ago. And I had wandered into an old bookseller close to the British Museum, and I had picked up a book of Richard Jefferies' pastoral writings, which is about like poaching manuals, which I'm kind of like weirdly obsessed with. And so he wrote 2 pastoral works, The Gamekeeper at Home and The Amateur Poacher, which were both about sort of poaching and also like just the English countryside. And I found this quote in the midst of all the talking about like the gorse and like whatever. I found this quote. No one seems to understand how I got food from the clouds, nor what there was in the night, nor why it is not so good to look at it from out of the window. They turn their faces away from me. Perhaps after all I was mistaken, and there never was any such place, and I was never there. And it hit me as being a really bizarre sort of aside, and like Jeffrey's had a lot of sort of mental health concerns, and he, he was definitely a romantic in the sense that he loved the English countryside and nature and all of these different things, but he often felt very isolated in his appreciation for these things because other people would be like, it's just a bush or whatever. And so like he sort of was like dealing with this feeling about himself, and so it was very interesting to sort of catch this weird sort of what don't you want to look out of the window moment and aside in it, and it sort of inspired me to incorporate that with cosmic horror and poaching, because my story, Food from the Clouds, is definitely, is that the title of it? Yes. Is definitely about poaching, but in the post-apocalypse, after some sort of cataclysmic event has happened, and London is a much wilder and greener space, and the parks have been taken under private ownership by like the wealthy elite. So that's sort of where I was thinking about it. So yeah, it was like the most random thing. I mean, you all know that I don't really write cosmic horror. I'm much more likely to write like weird, dirty stuff than like scary things, and it's definitely like a departure for me because I definitely decided to go for the spookier route, at least I hope. So it was a really fun project.
Yeah, very original idea too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually think it's one of the most imaginative pieces in the book. It reminds me a lot of some of the work that Sherry Priest and Kim Stanley Robinson have done on world building after catastrophic events.
Oh, thank you.
The Year of Rice and Salt comes to mind. So yeah, it's a fascinating and fabulous story, really.
Oh, thank you so much.
Lynn Jamnick has a question for Jesse. I'll just read it. Jesse, you used an HPL essay as inspiration for Letters to Lovecraft. As someone who wrote an MA on Lovecraft and Poe, who writes Lovecraftian fiction and is currently putting together a Lovecraftian anthology, what name escapes me?
Dreams in the Witch House.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited about seeing more of Lovecraft's personal philosophies about writing being worked into fiction. Was it one of your aims to specifically incorporate more philosophy as opposed to fictional Lovecraftian themes? So that's for Jesse.
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you, Lynn. And Lynn is a fabulous editor as well as a writer. I am definitely really looking forward to this project. I was a backer from the get-go, and so it's been really neat to see it coming together. I'm sure it's a very, very small chance, but on the small chance that anyone out there doesn't already have Dreams from the Witch House on their radar, definitely, I think the Indiegogo has ended, but I'm sure you can still track a copy down as it comes out, because it's going to be a really, really neat project. And I think Lynn's table of contents looks amazing. I can't wait to check it out.
Sure does.
Yeah,
now,
I funded it successfully, and I'm sure people can get copies when it's published. So yeah.
Yeah, it looks amazing, and that's a great question. I think that there has definitely been, obviously, no shortage of Lovecraftian fiction since Lovecraft himself was writing, and we have seen the mythos expand and contract and go off in very, very radical different shapes. But I do think that sometimes, because his mythos is so rich, it can be not too easy, but I think the temptation there to expand and explore different aspects of the existing body of work is very strong, and I've certainly done that myself. I mean, I've written a lot of short Lovecraftian fiction, and very often I will take something from Lovecraft's fiction and kind of run with it, like, oh, what if this was in a different setting? What if this was in a different time? And I think a lot of Lovecraftiana does that. And so kind of what intrigued me about this premise when they approached me, and it made it a little difficult in some ways, because it is not an esoteric concept, but it's a little bit different. It's not, okay, we want Cthulhu stories, or we want Nyarlathotep stories, or we want stories set in Arkham. It's
yeah,
kind of,
we want stories like in the Old West. I saw one on Kindle the other day in the Old West, which looked interesting. But yeah. not
And so,
examples like that.
yeah, and that stuff can be great, and I'm certainly not knocking it in any way, shape, or form. But one of the things that really drew me to this as an editor, and kind of that sort of like, oh, if I had been a writer, I would have been so excited to get, an invitation to this anthology. But I don't really believe in publishing my own work, since there's more authors out there than I'd ever be able to fit into one book, even without including myself. So when they came to me with the concept, I saw the invitation in my inbox, and I got really excited. And then when I realized they were asking me to edit it instead of write it, it was this sort of like, well, it's not what I expected, but I'm still really excited, because I think that, yeah, Lovecraft's philosophy is a lot richer than just, again, that one soundbite we were talking about of, like, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind. I think that, his work, if you're familiar with more than just a handful of stories, isn't as simple as, scary things from outer space. I mean, the fact that Lovecraft was an atheist and yet spent so much of his time dealing with this concept of religion as horror really opens a lot of doors that, you could very easily, and this is something that we can get into later. Molly and I are co-editing another anthology, and we've kind of talked about the things we've seen in the submission pile, and, you could very easily do a book of Lovecraftian religious stories, like stories that are all taking, their jump from existing world religions and putting a Lovecraftian spin on it. You can kind of take it anywhere. That's the great thing about Lovecraft, is you can do a by the numbers pastiche, or you can go wildly off of what people usually think of as Lovecraftian. You can write a Lovecraftian story that has no monsters, that is basically about existential despair, and you're still working in Lovecraft's playground. So yeah, that is the very long-winded answer to Lynn's very short, precise question.
I
Yeah,
have
I
a,
have a
question
question.
of sorts.
Yeah.
Okay, one thing I find is very interesting is this press, Stone Skin Press, because this isn't their first foray into Lovecraftiana. This was, I think, 2 years ago. They came up with this Shotguns versus Cthulhu, but it's not like really a shoot 'em up. It's really very interesting, unique kind of stories that almost sort of step outside the usual tribute anthology. And so now they come up with this. So they apparently approached you with the idea. So I just had a couple of thoughts, like, is this like, does this press have any other future Lovecraftian type projects in mind that you know about, or who was it who was the exec or whoever came up with the idea and pitched it to you? I just find that they're really kind of working on the edges. We just got this That Is Not Dead from PS Publishing, which is really firmly in the mainstream, and then these things are out on the periphery. And there's room for everything. I just find the press very interesting, their editorial philosophy.
Yeah, the person who approached me about Letters to Lovecraft, Simon Rogers, is the head of Stone Skin, and he, in conjunction with Robin D. Laws, who is probably no stranger to most people who are reading a lot of modern Lovecraftiana, he was the editor. Robin was the editor of Shotguns v. Cthulhu, and they are definitely, with Stone Skin Press, the philosophy there is, I think, sort of calling shenanigans on that whole idea that there's this big divide between literary fiction and genre fiction. And, it's funny because, to me, my whole life, I've read all kinds of stuff, and so it never really occurred to me. And at first, when I heard people talking about this, it seemed as kind of like a silly stereotype, but I've actually definitely seen people on both sides of it, talking about it. It's genre people bad-mouthing quote-unquote literary fiction, or whether it's people in the academy looking down their nose at Lovecraft or just genre in general. And Stone Skin is very firmly committed to producing work that balances the literary with the genre, if there even is such a difference. And they don't think there is, and I don't think there is, and I think their work is kind of challenging that very notion that, like, oh, well, if you have, a book working in the Cthulhu mythos, then it's going to be pulp. I mean, it's, the same ugly stereotypes that were plaguing the Weird Tales ago, you know, an entire generation, well, several generations ago, close to a century ago at this point. And so I think that their working on the periphery is definitely intentional, and as you pointed out with Shotguns v. Cthulhu, there are some stories in there that are definitely action-heavy, like bare-knuckle pulp homage, but then there's also stories by people like Nick Mamatas and Katerina Sedia and Tanya Barron that have this sort of, it's not that they're better or worse than the other stories in that book, but they're kind of using this premise of action-heavy mythos to prove that you can have very intelligent, heavy, heady works that still play in the sandbox that is kind of looked down on. I mean, I think, and I hope I'm not stepping on my toes, but I think I speak for most people who appreciate Lovecraft or Robert E. Howard or Clark Ashton Smith or other pulps, that only people who haven't read them, I think, really can have this idea that they're somehow inferior. I mean, the quality of the work speaks for itself. It is incredibly rich, and it's incredibly interested in exploring something other than, oh, let's try to scare the reader or let's try to titillate the reader.
Yeah,
so,
and you know what, Jesse? That's what I really love. This epitomizes what I really love about small press. I know Joe will agree with me on this. What this publisher is doing, you know, with, you know, an idea like that, you know, that a mainstream press would not do, and, you know, Shotguns v. Cthulhu as well, you know. It's a great thing. If we didn't have a small press, we wouldn't have books like this with these out there ideas, you know.
Well, absolutely. And, I mean, they're hardly by any means the only press. Obviously, you know, Lynn's new book and those previous projects and, you know, future projects are all very, very exciting because we're seeing, I think, kind of a golden age. And, you know, it's strange because I say that and then I think back and I realize that, you know, Lovecraftiana and mythos has never really gone away. But maybe with the ease that small publishers can now kind of get their work in front of a readership without, you know, having to cut out things in the back of a magazine to send off for your copy of this, you know, very, very micro press. Instead, you can just get online and find that there is this huge wealth of forthcoming work that really is existing to margins from the mainstream, as you said.
Right.
You know, Jesse, you know, I would say, I guess it was 4 years ago when I was shopping what would eventually be Reanimators. I took that to a major publishing house, and they looked at it, and they read it, and they loved it. And they said they would never publish a Mythos novel, and none of the 5 houses would publish a Mythos novel. Well, here we are, and I'm looking at what's coming out, and I see Mythos novels all over the place, from Tor, from all the major publishing houses. It's happening. What wasn't possible 5 years ago is now rampant through the industry.
Yeah, and
it strikes me as very odd that there was just a sudden shift, and it was very quick.
well, and I think that it's strange because people are so quick to talk with authority in terms of, you know, if you talk to one agent or you talk to one editor at a house, they'll tell you that, like, well, this is the industry and this is the standard. But I mean, Charlie Strauss's Laundry Files series has been ongoing for years now. Yep. And I've been very fortunate in that my work with Orbit has definitely, my novels that I've published to them have definite mythos elements. They're, you know, right. I am informed by Lovecraft because I grew up reading Lovecraft, but at the same time, you know, I think there is this sort of sense that as big houses are seeing that, you know, they might not want to take a chance on a book, but they see a little press take a chance on the same book they passed on, it does fabulously well, it's going to make it that much easier for presses to take, you know, bigger presses to take bigger chances and so on and so forth. So, but I did want to get back to something that Matthew had mentioned about what Stone Skin was doing in the future with Lovecraft stuff, and that plays back into Shotguns v. Cthulhu, because after I completed this book, they approached me and Molly about editing a follow-up to Shotguns v. Cthulhu. And we are actually in the process of editing right now a forthcoming book called Stories v. Cthulhu, which will take that same premise of action meets mythos, but instead of having a sort of, you know, contemporary firearms-based emphasis, it will be either historical or fantastical. So we're in the process of working on that right now, and I'm sure
Jesse,
Molly.
can you repeat that title for the audience? Because at least to me, you broke up a little bit right when you said the title.
Sorry. It's Swords v. Cthulhu instead of Shotguns v. Cthulhu. And again, it was something that Simon had planned from the time that Shotguns came out. But then after this book wrapped up, they wanted me and Molly to take a crack at co-editing it. So we did an open reading period. We did some invitations. We also did an open reading period, and we definitely had an overwhelming outpouring of interest. We had well over 200 submissions, and because we had so many, it'll be a little while before we have a final table of contents or anything. But I'm sure Molly could say some more about that project.
Can I?
Sure.
It's been really fun reading for it so far. We've definitely, we wanted to get a good mix of people in there, and so far I've been really delighted with. I actually haven't read any of the stories that we've solicited so far, but I have read a lot of what's come in through the open submission period, and I've been really delighted by seeing the sort of like wealth of voices that we've gotten access to. We haven't. It's hard talking about it. I have such a weird thing about talking things that are ongoing because it's possible that people have submitted that maybe even present right at this very moment on this chat, and so I don't want to talk too much about that right now. But it's
about when will it be published?
Jesse?
What's that?
When will it be published? Next year, right?
Yeah, it's looking like early next year. We actually were hoping to get out the end of this year, but with Letters to Lovecraft, we hit a production distribution snag, and so it's now available in brick and mortars and on Barnes and Noble, Powell's, Amazon, and all of those places. Letters to Lovecraft, but it came out December 1st in England, and it really wasn't until very recently that it was widely available in the U.S. And so rather than risk another end-of-the-year production distribution snag, we've decided to push it into early next year.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't worry about that, Molly. Didn't you tell me that Pete submitted and you rejected it like right away, or?
No.
No, I took a very big risk, and I'm not sure it panned out.
I haven't read it. I don't know. I haven't read it. I'm not even talking about it.
I'm not looking
I'm not convincing, as my grandmother would call it. Like I have been wrapped up in copy edits and then page proofs for my book, and so I've actually been way slacker than Jesse. So him throwing this in my court is fascinating because he's done way more work than I have done so far. But we're just sort of waiting and seeing. So.
Okay, so I have another question from Lynn, and this is for both of you, Jesse and Molly. She says, one more thing, I'm seeing a lot of environmentalist themes creeping into Lovecraftian horror. Did you notice this at all for Letters to Lovecraft? So.
Molly definitely takes that tactic in her story, and that is present. And I'm trying to think, there's definitely a few stories where you could take that sort of interpretation of events. Some of them are fairly open-ended, but if not for here, then definitely again with the Swords v. Cthulhu, I think we've seen a lot of stories there like that, and I think it's a very natural sort of response where, nature. Werner Herzog has this great quote about how monstrous nature is and how it is essentially just complete chaos. And for as much order and beauty as we might find in nature, the reality is the jungle is this incredibly dense, chaotic place. I'm not crazy about the film, but again, in Lars von Trier's Antichrist, he talks about nature as Satan's church, and this idea that the wilderness is this great, primeval source of baser instincts and chaos. And so I think it's very natural that as we are seeing increased amounts of pressure put on the environment through human intervention, that after things like Fukushima and ongoing concerns about climate change and global warming, that authors would be tapping into this and this sort of concern of the day where, because I think Lovecraft does appeal in many ways to, again, not to generalize, but I feel that Lovecraft's work often appeals to people who have a very scientific mind bent, people who are very interested in the world and kind of exploring the world. the fact that right now we're living in a time of very drastic environmental ecological change, it seems very natural that the horror of what is ongoing in our current world would bleed into the fiction. And so we're definitely seeing that, and I think we'll probably be seeing a lot more of it.
You know,
did you ever read Cryptonomicon by Neil Stevenson? Okay, well, there's this passage in it where this guy goes into a jungle in the South Seas on some island atoll or something, and it's like there's a comment made that like the jungle is raw and primeval, and it's all about eat or be eaten. And if you set foot into the premises, you've bought into the whole proposition. So, like, once a human steps into the jungle, they're living by those rules. It was just a very similar quote, similar to what you were saying.
You know, there's also a movie called The Last Winter, if I remember correctly, that I kind of saw as Lovecraftian. You've seen that, Jesse, and speaks to those themes as well. You know, did you like it? I thought it was a pretty good movie.
Yeah, I did. I saw his other one, Wendigo, and I liked it as well. But The Last Winter, I really enjoyed. Is it James LaGrosse and Ron Perlman?
Yeah.
And and again, I thought it was a really neat playing with these ideas of, you know, the apocalypse for every society throughout history has always been right around the corner. I mean, that's one truth that is often seen in every epoch, is everyone's convinced they're living in the last age. But it always seems very convincing to them, but I think for a lot of people now, it's really looking like, you know, we may be one of the last generations, or at least the last generation to continue on the same sort of trajectory before things undergo some very radical changes. And so I think it's very natural and I think very interesting to see so many writers kind of tapping into this, because I mean, isn't that kind of the history for an atheist like Lovecraft is, you know, he obviously had very jacked up ideas about things, but that sort of historical dichotomy, I mean, you know, we as humans have spent so much of our development trying to distance ourselves from nature and say like, oh, well, we're not like other animals. We're not a part of our environment. It's about dominating the environment instead of coexisting and kind of nurturing the environment. And we're definitely seeing the dividends of societies that have, you know, come through the Industrial Revolution with this sort of manifest destiny where the natural world is concerned. And so in many ways we are living on the brink of this sort of potential global catastrophe. And of course, what's more horrifying than, you know, the catastrophe of your own making? It's one thing.
Not only that, every time you step over an Indian Native American arrowhead, yeah, I mean, we're in the middle of an apocalypse for somebody else. I mean, it happened for them, you know, on a smaller scale. So yeah.
So, Jesse, earlier you were talking about nature, and when we were talking about ecological ideas moving into Lovecraftian fiction. Just earlier this week, I was watching this very short video of a small group of people out in small boats and kayaks and even a surfboard on a very still and calm black ocean. Nice, beautiful day. Wonderful video. And all of a sudden, the water between these people becomes just alive with small fish jumping. And then seagulls swoop down in droves to feed on the fish. And then two titanic mouths just rise up out of the ocean and swallow everything and suck it all down. And I looked at this and I said, that is the most Lovecraftian thing I've ever seen.
Where was this feed?
It's just a video of two whales feeding.
Like on YouTube or something?
Yeah, but it's so Lovecraftian in the sense that here's a bunch of people just sitting around minding their own business, enjoying the day, and the very medium on which they live is intruded on by something from outside.
Yeah.
And they have all these signs and symbols and all these things reacting to it, but they don't realize that something horrifying is going to happen until it's far too late.
Well, I think you could probably, someone other than me with more time and a better intellect and commitment to research, could probably do a very compelling argument for Lovecraftian horror as fundamentally being informed by the natural world. I mean, once again...
That's absolutely everywhere. As a teenager reading Lovecraft and watching Lawrence of Arabia, the scene where we're looking into the desert and it starts as a dot in the distance, it's where Omar Sharif rides up, where we see how inconsequential we are in this vast expanse of nothingness. In Jeremiah Johnson, where Redford steals from Jack London, we have, here he is, he's wet, he's frozen, he's under this heavy pine, saturated with this deep snow, he's got a couple of matches, he's trying to light a fire, which he needs to save his life, and just at the point where he's getting the fire to ignite, bam, we get a hint of breeze, and all this snow from this heavy pine comes down and erases his efforts. You know, the natural world does not care about you. It is just as carnivorous in its own detached manner as anything Lovecraftian. Environmentally, I just thought that's always been there, and we should see a lot more of that. I wrote one story, which is my tip of the hat to Laird, which takes place in Antarctica, and the weather is the monster. You know, you're in condition.
That story
you're
at
in
the last
condition
time.
5. You know, you're outside in condition 5 weather in Antarctica. Forget it, and it doesn't care about you. It doesn't recognize your existence. So yeah, I think the environment, and you had earlier talked about the city. As a solo individual, we could pluck you and perhaps drop you down out of New York or London or wherever, and you're alone. That vastness, that just the city itself, you know, environment is a huge factor, or can be, depending on how you use it.
Yeah, and it's something that I hadn't necessarily would have articulated this way before this conversation, but it's very easy to look at Lovecraft's horror as sort of an atheist response to religion through a naturalist lens, which is, well, if there were powers greater than us, what would their response be? Would they be this sort of beatific, angelic, godlike, in the Judeo-Christian sense, benefactors, or looking at the natural world, would creatures greater than us, different than us, be using us the same way that the natural world has always existed, which is through this food cycle? And
yeah. Not to mention, on top of all this, you know, what you're talking about, Joe's talking about, the sheer size of the universe as compared to, you know, where we live, Earth and the solar system. Someone posted a video the other day that I don't remember where. I think it was the Historical Society's group page, that starts with, you know, the Earth and then goes larger and larger and larger. And, you know, we've all seen these videos, but I think it's pretty easy to forget, you know. So.
Well, and also just playing up one other thing that Joe mentioned, Jeremiah Johnson. I've always found the tagline for that movie incredibly tinged with cosmic horror, which is great. On the poster for Jeremiah Johnson, it said, "Some say he died, some say he never will." It's like,
yeah.
How did you go about choosing which authors that you wanted to submit? Was there an open submission for this book, or did you just send out invitations, or what'd you do?
Yeah, for this one, it was invitation only for a few reasons. It was my first time as anthologist, and I frankly read embarrassingly slow. I tell myself I'm a careful reader, and that's why it takes me so long to get through things, but the reality is I'm a very slow reader. And given the premise that they presented me with at Stone Skin of, like, we want to see, like, kind of some of your favorite authors responding to this. And so I really had, you know, carte blanche to kind of go wherever I wanted with it. And I think an open submission would be really neat for a future project. But for this one, it was definitely a case of, like, their premise was, modern horror writers who have some sort of, a career already by and large. There's one debut in there, but by and large, they're people who are fairly well established. I think with the idea that, like, if you've been working in the industry for a while and you've been working on your craft and your art for a while, you may be more amenable to kind of thinking about a story to write that has the element of responding to an essay, but without it being incredibly heavy-handed and preachy. There's that sort of risk, right, with something like that you ask someone to respond to an essay, and so they respond with another essay, versus a work of fiction, which, on the surface, if you didn't know the backstory, you might have no idea that it related to this essay at all.
Yeah, you've got Nick Mamatas, Angela Slatter, Gemma Files, Tim Levin, lots of people in here.
Livia's story in there is a beautiful study of the Depression.
Yeah. No, that was a phenomenal story, and that's one of two that Ellen Datlow is going to be reprinting in her year's best horror, the Brian Evanson and the Livia Llewellyn story. And I think, Livia's story, as with everything that I've read of Livia's, is just really, really phenomenal. And once again, I think you could pick it up and read it without realizing that there is any sort of connection to Lovecraft in any way, and still appreciate it and come back to that idea of, like, oh, well, this is definitely tapping into some of that existential angst and despair that permeates so much of Lovecraft's work. I mean, it is essentially just, and honestly, I find it, like, as disturbing as just about anything he's written. It's, it's a gut punch of a piece, like a lot of her work, and it really, really is, a sort of object lesson in the potential for projects like this that say, well, Cthulhu is great, Nyarlathotep is great, Azazel is great. You can kind of go anywhere you want with it, but what about the fundamental idea behind Lovecraft, and what about his philosophies on the nature not just of storytelling, but of fear and of existence? Because I think part of what makes Lovecraft's storytelling so phenomenal is that in many ways he experienced deep fear in his life of all sorts of things that nowadays we find very silly or problematic, but he was definitely a man who was uncomfortable in the world that he was living in, and that comes through in his fiction. So I really think that Livia also taps into that sort of, her story is definitely in many ways about the struggle of women, especially in that era, and feeling, we think of ourselves as being kind of trapped on this cosmic sense of, like, the insignificance of humanity on Earth and our inability to go anywhere. But, she basically takes this sort of snapshot of this marriage, and it's every bit as, terrifying, and the implications of it are every bit as horrifying and deeply traumatizing as anything, on the cosmic level that Lovecraft introduced.
I also liked your introduction where, I'm not going to read all three of these paragraphs, but you start off with, we talk a lot about Lovecraft these days, far more than people ever talked about him in his own time. We also talk about Lovecraft as a person. We do so in part because he was a patient mentor and a warm friend to so many other authors. And this is what I like about, I like personally, I like looking at things as they are. It's not one way or the other. You continue, we do so also because behind his extraordinary creatures and impossible worlds lurked a disappointingly prosaic horror, and talks about his bigotry a little bit. He wasn't, it's a little hard to imagine, but he was both things,
Yeah, and it's disappointing sometimes to see some of the reactions to the fundamental facts of who Lovecraft was as a person, because on the one hand, you have this sort of argument of, like, well, he was just a person, and why does this stuff matter, and everyone's got flaws. But that's often used as a sort of smokescreen for actually talking about the reality of Lovecraft, which is that he wasn't, I really hate the phrase man of his time, because it, doesn't really mean anything. It's as if history was something that people are enslaved to, and, like, you know, in every single era, you can use that phrase to excuse all sorts of horrible things by saying, well, they were a man of their time. Well, you know, Lovecraft was a man of his time, but as I believe Lehman Kessler said, like, well, whose time was Langston Hughes a man of? Like, we definitely often are very quick, I think, to, if not excuse, at least willfully ignore unseemly facts about our heroes, because I think in a lot of ways it comes down to this sort of fear of, well, if I really take a good long look and I acknowledge that he wasn't just a man of his time, he was behind the times in many ways, and he was a really horrible person in some aspects, like, what does that say about me? What would it say about me, Jesse Bullington, if I say that one of my favorite writers of all time was this horribly racist asshole? And, you know, I think the best way to fight that is to acknowledge it, because I think you can acknowledge that this artist created these amazing works, but he also was a human that had these incredibly horrible flaws, and downplaying them, I think, runs the risk of kind of rewriting history to make it seem as if, well, you know, back then eugenics this and you know, WASP upbringing that, but the reality is there were a lot of peers of his, and there were a lot of people living generations before him that had much, you know, more reasonable views about these things. So to me, that's always been the sort of thing that's been really strange, is from an early age kind of picking up on Lovecraft's vocabulary. First of all, it's hard to miss that. And then getting older and reading his essays and reading Maurice Levy's, I want to say it's like Lovecraft, a study of Maurice Levy's Lovecraft.
Yeah, Study in the Fantastic. Yeah.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah, and it was translated by Joshi, at least the version that I read. And it's hard to imagine reading that book and reading these sorts of words from Lovecraft's own mouth and then saying, well, it wasn't a big deal. It didn't play very heavily into his fiction. It did, and he was horrible. He was a horrible person. He could be a really great person, and he was a wonderful mentor, as I mentioned in the book. And I don't doubt that, you know, at certain dinner parties with guests, he could be incredibly charming and friendly and warm to everyone in the room. But I think it does history a disservice if we put on blinders and say, well, it wasn't as bad, or we shouldn't talk about it because, and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of, you know, really great ways to approach Lovecraft without just kind of coming at it from one direction or the other. I mean, it cuts both ways, and there have been people who have dismissed him entirely based on these biographical facts. And I think that does a disservice to his work.
Well, you're
but
swinging the pendulum way too far when you do that, because then you have to dismiss people like Poe, who was a pedophile. You have to dismiss people like Hemingway, who there's no question that he really ruined the lives of his family members, you know, and so on, you know.
Yeah, and we have that throughout the arts. If we look at musicians, composers, you know, the exact same thing will come up.
And I think balance is really the key. Like you're saying, Jesse, things like this cannot be ignored, and they should not be downplayed. At the same time, if our standard is we only read nice people, we're not going to be reading very many people, I think, you know.
Well, the other point too to make here is our approach. You take people like Rick and I. We begin reading Lovecraft. You know, it's over 40 years. It's well over 40 years ago. You didn't have this information available. You know, we just simply had here's books of stories. You know, there's basically at that point nothing for biographical material. You know, so depends where you're getting it and when you're getting it. You know.
Yeah.
Well, and I definitely feel like talking about Lovecraft, and not just his views about race, but I mean, we can talk about his anti-Semitism, we can talk about his misogyny, we can, you know, talk all day about this stuff, and I think we should be talking about it because it's part of who he was, and it's part of these worlds he created, and I guess I just have seen, and this is by no means universal, but I've certainly seen this sort of attitude of it's enough to just acknowledge this and move on, but at the same time that leads to a lot of times noticing people saying things like, well, why are we talking about this again? When the reality is, of course, we live in a society and we live in a world where people are constantly discovering Lovecraft for the first time. And just as you discover Lovecraft for the first time, often many stories down the road, there comes a time when you really kind of are confronted with the ugliness of Lovecraft for the first time. And I found it very cathartic to talk about. I mean, I remember, again, having these conversations with friends about, like, dude, what is up with Lovecraft? I had no idea. You know, the vocabulary and the rats and the walls. Like, oh, so he named his cat that, whatever. But then you read these letters, and it's horrifying. And so I think that the best way to go forward with it is just, as with his fiction, keeping alive this acknowledgement that he wasn't perfect, and his work was informed by these, you know, frankly, backwards, disappointing ideas, especially for a man who was so interested in the sciences and so interested in expanding his boundaries that he held these ideas. The idea that we should, like, not talk about it or brush it under the rug, or, you know, it's not a sort of thing that will ever be resolved. Again, you know, Joe was talking about music. I mean, you know, Wagner, for example, you can't, nowadays, any serious criticism or discussion of Wagner, you have to talk about that. And, or Gauguin, the painter, I mean,
Delius.
Sorry, Joe?
So, moving on, we're lucky enough to have Molly here. She's been on the show a few times, and I know during the headlights, look now. She's got a book coming out in, what, a month? A novel? It's called Vermilion. You're muted.
I am muted. I'm unmuted now. Sorry.
Oh, and Molly has long hair now, so you can go with the book or the long hair. You can talk about both. Just say whatever you want to say.
Yeah, actually, it's exactly a month until my first novel comes out, I should say. And I'm really excited about it. It seems to be coming together really well. Word has done a really good job by way of the cover and the design of it. I'm really excited about it.
So, what's it about? So if you said to someone found out, you know, Molly's got a novel coming out, and they said to you, "Oh, hey, Molly, what's the novel about?" What would your answer be? How would you?
It's a weird Western. It's definitely about death. Just concisely, I guess I would say that the main character is a young woman who her job is that like ghosts and monsters are real, and it's a sort of alt history America, and ghosts and monsters are real, and you know, if you need a werewolf taken care of, you call somebody else, but if you have a ghost haunting you, then you would call Lou Merriweather, and she would come to your house, and she would use her arsenal to sort of Wait,
is she a female Ghostbusters? Because I don't think that would work. There
is like a Ghostbusters thing to it, but it's definitely.
I don't think a movie like that could ever work. Do you? That's sarcasm, just to be clear.
So yeah, she deals, but there's some like liminal nature, right? Because like, so a ghost is pretty clear cut, but like, is a vampire a monster, or are they undead? And so like, she gets into some sort of liminal spaces with that too. But apart from all of that, so that's sort of her normal everyday life. Is helping San Francisco out in that way. Unfortunately, you know, it's 1870 and it's in San Francisco, and she is ethnically half Chinese, and so she sort of has access to that community in Chinatown, and she finds out that a lot of the workers who worked on the Transcontinental, like Toisanese immigrants, have not come home again and have gone missing, and since no one's really interested in pursuing this, she decides to turn detective and to head out into where they seem to have gone, which is Colorado, and see what's up. They seem to have gone to a mysterious sanatorium somewhere deep in the Rocky Mountains, and she chases after them to see what might be happening up there.
As I told you before the show started, I love stories with sanatoriums in them. So.
I know, they're so great. I love quack health stuff. I'm kind of obsessed with quack health cures in general. I'm not going to make any comments about specific ones because I don't know, but I was actually just in some caves.
If you're obsessed with quack solutions and doctors, you should get my illness, because then they all come out of the woodwork. Yeah, this will fix it, this will fix it, this will fix it.
It's really interesting. I find the internet culture surrounding illness very fascinating because people suddenly, you know, the veil of the internet allows you to become a complete expert in what might cure someone.
Yeah.
and it's really bizarre because everyone's an expert on Facebook, right? And so it's curious to me to see people ascribing. I don't know. I love health culture. I love like health cures. I love when people are like, no, 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 this is real, and it's like, well, what does that mean? I don't know. I just especially in the 19th century when there's no regulation on that kind of thing. I mean, there's no regulation on what kind of weirdo can on Facebook tell you that they're certain that cayenne pepper is going to cure whatever, but in the 19th century you could put anything on a label and claim that it cured it, and people believed it. I mean, I was just sort of caving in a lava tube in Utah last week, and it was reminding me of I forget the name of the doctor, but some doctor in the 19th century who was totally convinced that living in caves would cure your tuberculosis, and I think maybe finished off like 100 tuberculosis patients that way, just insisting that they would feel better as long as they kept breathing this cave air, and it's like, well, where is your what? And people believed it, and it's really terrifying.
Yeah, it's there are consequences just to believing things without evidence. You know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I really love The Road to Wellville, that novel. I love parts of it. Like I find that kind of thing totally fascinating, and so I definitely wanted to incorporate. I mean, if you're dealing with the Weird West and like the 19th century, like, I mean, medicine is such an interesting place, especially when you're dealing with issues of death and immortality, and how do we live and how do we keep ourselves healthy. So that was really exciting to research.
Didn't you describe it to me as The Road to Wellville meets Big Trouble in Little China?
Yeah, actually, I totally did. I definitely pitched it to an editor once as like set in the historical past of Big Trouble in Little China, and so I know I really love that movie. And
yeah.
It's so freaking great, and it's definitely I draw on the sort of feel of that movie quite a bit, but also there's a series of 1980s Hong Kong movies that actually Jesse, your wife, introduced me to when she was doing I had to babysit her class when she was away at a conference when Jesse's wife was teaching a Hong Kong cinema class, and it happened to be this day that they were watching a film called Mr. Vampire, which is a Hong Kong movie about Jiangxi, or Jiangxi is sort of is the Mandarin pronunciation of this native Chinese specter that is sort of halfway in between a vampire and a zombie. There's sort of elements of both to it. And I was really captivated by it, and it got me interested in the genre of these Jiangxi films of the 80s. And there's a bunch of them, some are better than others, but I totally found it fascinating and went down the rabbit hole with watching a bunch of them. And so that was definitely a big inspiration for me as well.
You know, you just said that you draw a lot on the mood or the feel of Big Trouble in Little China, which I thought was really interesting. You know, there's a lot of things I like about that movie, but one of the things that I really like about it is it just seems like to me, I'm probably not going to articulate this very well, but there's this hidden world that most people don't know about, you know, feeling from the movie, you know. This world beneath the world type thing, or all these things, strange things going on that the general public doesn't know about, which is what I really like. So.
No, it's really interesting, and I really enjoy the fact that, so I guess that movie was originally going to be set in like Western times, whatever that, like 19th century, I guess, and they decided to do it set in the 80s, 90s, whatever it is, and I think it would have been a really fascinating film, but what I really like about it is that you have this sort of like stoic Kurt Russell figure, right, that who's in the middle of all this stuff, but instead of being the like badass who just powers through it, he's sort of like, what is even happening, and needs to be sort of guided along this like path towards understanding that it sort of it delegitimizes him, but at the same time he still remains a really vital and interesting character. I don't know, there's just so much going on with that film that I never get tired of it. I just think it's so great. So
Molly, it all makes sense if you realize that Kurt Russell is the sidekick.
He is. He's playing sidekick. And also, like, Egg Shen. I mean, like, that guy is definitely a baller, and, like, he sort of falls under the influence of these characters and is sort of guided to success, but he's not the lone wolf who's like, oh, I'm just going to take care of business. It's like, no, he has to be sort of, like, led to water, and then, I don't know, I find it a really interesting film.
He's the philosophist trucker.
Yeah, it is so good. Yeah. Although not
Not
everyone feels that way. I showed it to one of my really good friends when I was in grad school, and he was like, "What is this movie? Why did you make me watch it?" And I was like, "I don't understand. How could you not love this? Like, what is confusing?" And he's like, "What is the ending?" And I'm like, "Do you need more explanation than that? That guy is on his truck. Like, I mean, like,
you don't like the movie? Okay, we can't be friends.
it's just interesting because, it does draw a lot on Hong Kong cinema. And, I remember the first time I watched it, I was definitely left it befuddled. But now that I've watched a lot more that is sort of like 80s and 90s Hong Kong cinema, like, I understand more where John Carpenter was coming from with that project, where it's like, yeah, it is going to end on this ambiguous note. I mean, like, I can't remember if it's an actual freeze frame, but the number of Hong Kong movies that end with people just like a monster jumping out and people being like, ah, and then it's a freeze frame. It's like, that's just how they end. Like, it's great. And I think that it's definitely an interesting, we like resolution in our Hollywood films, and I think his sort of crossing genres is like a really interesting experiment, and like, can this work? And I think it does.
Dave on the message board said I must have missed it. What's the title of Molly's new book? And that's Vermilion, right?
It is Vermilion. That is the title. 1L. I don't care if you misspell it, but if you look it up, it has 1L, not 2. Both are correct. So anyway, it's just.
Mark, can I have
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, for both Jesse and Molly. You both, like Joe and Pete here, you both contributed to the Story Wisdom Library.
Yeah.
Could you each talk about your entries? Like, Molly, you got one of the most obscure books in the Lovecraft canon.
I did. I was assigned it here on Egypton, and I was glad because there was like a Greek language overlap, and that's like one of the few things that I have actual knowledge of. I translated ancient Greek for a couple of years in grad school, and I decided to treat mine as sort of like a gender weird transformation manual through time, which was really freeing. I mean, like, people got various entries. Like, I know Joe did The King in Yellow, of course, because he's like the major scholar, but there's like so much on that. I was kind of, although like there were other texts that I was more immediately drawn to, I was kind of glad to get this obscure little thing because I could kind of do anything I wanted with it, so that was really fun. But I've been kind of babbling for a while, so if other people want to take it away.
That's all right. Jesse?
Yeah.
Did you want Jesse to answer that too, Rick?
Yeah, yes, he did one of his own books.
Yeah, and I must say, in interest of propriety, that was not my idea. The editor, Nate, asked me if I would be willing to take part in the project, and I jumped at it, of course. I mean, it was really, really exciting, and obviously working with, not with, but being in the same volume as Joe and Molly and so many other great people was really exciting. And I guess Nate had read my novel, The Enterprise of Death, from 2011, and I guess before I talk about the entry in the Story Wisdom Library, I need to talk a little bit about this novel, because in my novel, The Enterprise of Death, it's set in 16th century Europe and has to do with necromancy and monsters and mercenaries and the Italian Wars and art. And in many ways, the novel is a sort of historical feminist retelling of The Thing on the Doorstep. Because whenever I read The Thing on the Doorstep, my big thought reading that was like, this is such a great story. I mean, I really like that piece in particular. But I always kind of wondered, like, Asneth White's, like, Asneth White's plight is kind of overlooked, I mean, that's, the big reveal is that this horrible thing happened, but to me what was really intriguing is, like, what would it be like to have some horrible old monster trying to basically, possess your body? And so one of the key plot of The Enterprise of Death is about this slave from Africa who ends up through chance ending up in Spain and is unwillingly indentured to this necromancer. And this necromancer has this big plan where he has persisted through the centuries by using his apprentices to change bodies and transmute himself into a new body. And so the first portion of the novel is about Awa, this West African girl who ends up going to North Africa, and then from North Africa over to Andalusia, and is imprisoned by this necromancer, and he's forcing her to learn the rites that will be necessary for him to take over her body. So it's kind of this historical retelling of The Thing on the Doorstep in some ways. And one key to her understanding of necromancy and the dark arts is this book that the necromancer has. And it's this book that there are certain twists that I won't give away that you find out in the novel about the origin of the book. But it's something I invented because obviously you don't grow up reading Lovecraft and Borges and everyone else without getting this deep love of esoteric books full of forbidden legends. And so when Nate approached me for the Story Wisdom Library, he said, why don't you do an entry for the book from the Enterprise of Death, this necromancer's book? And it doesn't have a name or anything like that. It's just the book that she learns from. And it took some work because the book is destroyed at the end of the Enterprise of Death, but it's destroyed off camera. So I was able to restore it, at least in, partial form for the Story Wisdom Library. And so it was, getting all the way back around to your question, Rick, it was a really neat experience for me because I got to return to this novel that I really enjoyed writing and think about it in a completely different way, where like Nate had read the novel, and what he really glommed onto and appreciated was this book, and he had all these questions about this book that in my mind had resolved when I wrote the end of the novel. And so I went back to it, and I tried to write something that would still be interesting even if you hadn't read the novel. But if you had read the novel, The Enterprise of Death, it makes so much more sense and is this sort of, by proxy miniature sequel and kind of leaves the door open to that world to go back and blank at some point or another. So.
The Enterprise of Death sounds really interesting. Can people just go to Amazon and get that?
Yeah, it should be available in your brick and mortars or Amazon, wherever. It's.
Okay, I'll post a link on the message board.
Yeah, you can get it in the Kindle edition.
I'm sorry, Rick?
You can get it up for Kindle.
Yeah, it was put out by Orbit and is still in print, so it should be fairly easy to find. And I think of the 3 novels I've written, it's the most overtly Lovecraftian. I think, and it's also, I think, it's hard to pick a favorite novel of your own, but I think it was in many ways the most ambitious, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. So if you like Lovecraft and you like monsters and you like necromancy, but you also like seeing something other than the whitewashed, erased version of Europe that you sometimes get in historical fiction or fantasy, it may appeal there as well because it deals a lot with people of color and people of non-heteronormative persuasions in the European context. Because in researching the book, I, of course, I have a background in history, but wanted to write something set in historical Europe that wasn't just the same old upper classes, white people, not really straying outside of the comfort zones of historical fiction and fantasy. And so I'm very happy with how it turned out, and of course, anyone who reads it is very free to disagree, because once you've invested the time, you're welcome to call me an idiot and say I did it all wrong, but until then, you should maybe pick it up and decide for yourself.
Molly, which makes me, I've been meaning to ask you and I keep forgetting, Vermilion, is that going to be available in print and Kindle, or just print, or?
Yeah, it's definitely... it has distribution. It should be in some brick and mortars, and it'll definitely be available on ebook and on any major website retailer. That's not even how you say that. Online retailers. Thank you. Yes. So yeah, it will be available. It is distributed, and yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, I was seeing if it was on for pre-order at Amazon yet, but it doesn't look.
No. So Ross is doing an interesting thing, like he did for Children of Old Grief, which I know. Is definitely something that I think the Lovecraft eZine readership is probably aware of. Right now there's a bundle available through Word Horde. If you order it, your paper copy will be signed by me, and you'll also get a free ebook bundled with it. So right now the pre-orders are through the Word Horde website, but it should be available for Amazon. I'm not actually sure the date it will be available on Amazon, but right now the pre-orders are through Word Horde, so that anyone who does pre-order will get an exciting copy.
Oh, and Lynn just posted a link to that on the message board, so thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
Now, I know, Molly and Jesse, that you've collaborated on at least one story together. How was it collaborating with one another? How do you go about it? Do one of you write a draft, or do you discuss it back and forth, or whatever?
So the story, I guess, that we're talking about is Tubby McMungus, Fat from Fungus.
Right.
Obviously, the best story about sentient cats ever written. And I don't. So Jesse and I have collaborated before. So we did for a while. We did a column, just amateur style, called Films of High Adventure. That one of us, the premise of Films of High Adventure, and right now it's actually we've brought it back and it's on Porno Kitsch right now. They generously agreed to host it. And it's basically, the premise is like movies that one or the other or both of us watched as kids that we rewatch as adults and then talk shit about, basically. And so we were kind of used to, and Jesse being a film buff, Jesse managed a video store for many years. It's actually like when we met, he was managing a video store, and so he has like sort of intense film knowledge, whereas I will just swear a lot and be adorable, and so it was a good sort of like back and forth. And so he would sort of write these like long, elaborate, like, who do we blame for this movie? And then I would be like, I hate this. And so we were kind of used to working. We would just send files back and forth. And I think that's how we did Tubby, right? Like I wrote like 500 words, and then you would edit it, and then write like 700 more, and then I would edit that and write more. Is that? I don't know. It was years ago. I was probably.
Yeah. No. The story with Tubby too is because Molly and I have collaborated, many times on several things that have not, and other things that may never see the light of day. We've worked before on many things, and with Tubby, actually, it's funny because when we found out that Innsmouth Free Press was putting out an anthology of fungus fiction, and it was co-edited by Orrin Gray and Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who are two great writers, great editors. And as soon as we heard about this project, we both wanted to write something for it. And Molly actually came to me and was like, hey, would you want to collaborate on something? We haven't co-written something in a while. And I was like, no, I've kind of got this idea I think I'm going to do something with. And then Molly told me what she was planning on doing for it. And I was like, please let me work on this with you. I'm so sorry. Please let me work on this with you. And she graciously accepted. And so...
It's just because you have a weird thing with my cat.
It's not weird. Is that weird? Molly's got a cat, and we're friends, and I guess that's weird, being friends with a cat.
He just comes over and messes with my cat constantly. It's really weird. And my cat is... John. It's the title for the story, Tubby McMungus. Like, when we adopted this cat, we found him one day, like the closet door was open, my husband and I, and we just saw his little tail sticking out of this bag of food that he was just like, like munching, his first butt sticking out, and John was like, get out of there, Tubby McMungus, and like grabbed him and like threw him across the room. Not really. And it just kind of stuck, and so Tubby McMungus was just something that I really wanted to use, and cats wearing pubic wigs it just seemed like a good idea at the time.
That was Molly's idea. That was entirely.
How many cats do you have? How many cats do you have, Molly? How many cats?
I only have one right now. I had two for a while, but unfortunately one has passed on, and now it is just the toad, and who is sometimes known as Tubby McMungus.
He's a border.
I love cats. We've got 5 cats. I know when it's bedtime because that's when they start chasing each other all around the house.
Yeah.
They don't seem to do it during the day.
No, they know, and I don't know, the toad will often get into bed and then just be sitting there looking at me resentfully if I'm staying up too late watching cartoons or whatever, and cats are great. Cats are the best. I don't know. I'm definitely a crazy cat lady in training.
Oh, well, I've not said this before. It has absolutely nothing to do with Lovecraft, but I'm working on a kid's book. It's called Spy Cats, so I'll send you a copy.
I would love it. Oh my god, yeah, cats are great. I would love to read that. That sounds wonderful.
Well, the really funny thing is based on all 5 cats that I have, as if they were like these little spies that were...
That sounds amazing. And 5 cats is a lot of cats. That's probably like... And they all have such good... Jesse, are you literally uncorking a bottle of alcohol?
Well, it was already uncorked. It's
okay. All right, never mind. Sorry. I'm not trying to call out.
That kind of show. It's just that kind of show.
Go better with booze. Trust me on this.
This episode sponsored by Teketsuru 17 Year Pure Malt.
There you go.
Come by.
Could you give us an example of one of these movies you reviewed together?
Oh shit! Yeah, I think Conan was the first, right?
Yeah, Conan the Barbarian was Volume 1.
Yeah. Which is obviously the greatest. Whatever Tor.com may say is definitely the best fantasy movie. So it's all downhill from there.
Wait a minute. Conan with Schwarzenegger is the best?
Number one.
Number one, yeah.
Really?
I hate that movie.
Oh, come on, The Sword and the Sorcerer or Beastmaster. Come on.
Okay, ferrets are not as cool as Sandal Bergman, and I'm just gonna say that right now.
Yeah, Conan. People either get down with it or not. And
yeah, it's true.
I think Molly and I are kind of the outliers in that we both really, really love Robert E. Howard, but we still love the movie. Like, I think a lot of times people who grew up with the comics or really like Robert E. Howard see that movie and they see all the faults in it, and they're like, why doesn't he have black hair? Like, what is going on in this movie? Why is Thulsa Doom the villain when he's from an entirely different series of stories? But to me, it's the best. Yeah, James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom, I still maintain is like the best villain. I mean, that hair, I mean, everything about it. It's so good.
Well, the problem was, I was going to say, the problem was when I saw it, and this was somewhat prophetic in my analysis. I said, they misused Schwarzenegger totally in this movie. He does very good, quick one-liners. Get rid of this narration. Don't have him talk that much, but just have him say something memorable, which was the Terminator, which came out.
He's so good, though. Like, he tries really hard. That's the cutscene. Well, okay, the director's cut, like, definitely is. I think it's much more coherent in general. And, like, I don't know, man. I'm the kind of person who tears up whenever he's like, my father and I would pick blueberries in the wind. And I'm like, yes. Like, this is all I want from a movie. Like, I just want barbarians musing on their childhood. I don't care. I don't care that sword forging scene at the beginning is wrong. Haters gonna hate. I don't give a shit. Like, whatever. Call the cops. Like, whatever. Conan's the best. And I don't know. So, yeah, I get really passionate about that movie.
Well, I mean, I thought he had some. I mean, I thought the line where he's praying to Chrome and saying, "Help me," or go to hell, basically.
Yeah, no, it's just, I don't know, whatever. But then we Jesse and I have done other movies such as Lady Hawk, which caused me to have like a fit, basically, of anger and rage and hatred, and I was throwing things, and I think that 2-hour movie was like a 4-hour process because I kept pausing it to like scream at the television about my rage.
What don't you like about Lady Hawk?
Well, wait a
What
second.
does Molly like about
back
Lady
to-
Hawk?
I don't have
Much
2 hours. How much time do we have?
No, go back to Conan a second. You know, one of the things that makes that movie so fabulous, sorry, Rick, it is a fabulous movie, is the score by Basil Polidaris.
The score is excellent. I'll give you
The
granted.
best
So good.
musical score for a sword and sorcery movie ever. So that
That
whole
is true.
scene
That is
where they
true.
sneak into the mountain and they break into the party where they're eating the human soup.
Good. Yeah.
The music behind that makes the movie. It does.
Yeah.
Whatever, Pete.
All right, so I will admit to this. When I was in college, the theme for Conan was part of my move.
Yeah, man. Oh my God. I don't want to. Wait a second. Okay, I don't want to know what you mean by the move. I don't.
It was the move. It was there to set the mood.
Okay, well that probably was pretty
really?
epic.
Okay.
So
How does that set the mood exactly?
You need the right kind of girl.
Wait a minute. Are you talking about the main theme, the Riddle of Steel, or are you talking about wifing, the love theme?
I'm talking about the whole album. The whole album.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I was just reading. There was some article maybe on IO9 about like everything you never knew about Conan, and I realized that I have Excalibur, which is like a totally a B-flick compared to Conan. Whatever. We have to thank for the score by Basil Polidaris because they had used Carmina Burana in that, and the famous, I forget the guy's name now, but it's like an actual piece of like classical music, and that's what Milius wanted for the Conan theme.
It's by Carl Orff. But the other thing they used in Excalibur,
right.
they used a lot of Wagner.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and so because it had been used so recently, they were like, well, I guess we got to get better, like different music. And then they were like, hey, Basil, and he was like, sure, I will score your ridiculous fantasy epic, and it was great. Yeah.
Oh, so Pete, I misunderstood. You said I was picturing you having a girl over and you're like, hey baby, watch this movie, Conan.
Oh
You know,
no.
it was the album. Okay.
It was the sound.
Sound.
And he was like, "Come warm yourself by my fire. Don't you want to warm yourself by my fire?" And then it got real weird after that. Like,
My
And it was a
metaphorical
good move.
fire.
Wasn't a good move. But it was a move.
yeah. And then you got thrown into a giant fireplace that was definitely the right size for having a human body thrown into, and it got really awkward.
Yeah.
Question from the audience.
No. Wait a minute. Hold it. Let's go back here. We got cut off.
Oh,
I
the
want to
lady.
know the top 3 things that Molly dislikes about Lady Hawk.
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah, let's go there before I go on.
Shut up, Jesse. Let's see. Okay, so the part at the end where Rutger Hauer's like, "Kill her if I lose," and it's like, did she agree to that? Like, was that cool? Was that ever in her living will? Like, I don't even like. Anyway, that is not cool. Rutger Hauer in general, I have like a real hatred for, and I don't. Whatever. I don't care. Like, I don't like Rutger Hauer. Matthew Broderick's accent. Okay, I guess that's 3. So I don't know. Also, spelling hawk with an E, that's the bonus round. Like, I don't care. It's like a hawk with an E, and I don't like anything with an E on the end of it that doesn't need it. I don't care.
So do you spell magic with a K?
I did when I was maybe 15. And maybe if I'd seen that movie when I was 15 instead of damn 30 years old, I would have thought it was great. But I didn't, and then that was the premise of the Lady Hawk review where I got really angry.
Every time Molly starts complaining about Rutger Hauer, I just tell her that all these things will be lost like tears in the rain, and she usually punches me.
You know, he's seen attack ships off the shoulder of Orion.
I don't care. Jesse, okay, so Jesse's also responsible for showing me Flesh and Blood, which I don't care. I really hated. Like, I really did not like that movie, and it's sort of like, I really can't watch Rutger Hauer after that. Like,
you know, what's her name? The author of the Interview with the Vampire books was really pushing for Rutger Hauer to be Lestat in the movie.
Oh my God! Well,
In fact, she goes so far as in one of the later books to have one character watching Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And pointing out to another. Now that's Lestat. That's the character of Lestat. So.
Okay.
Anne Rice has a good eye.
For what?
I would have loved to see Rutger Hauer in that wig. That would have made my life complete.
Lord, Lord.
Well, Tom Cruise did do a good job.
Wait. I'm sorry, I just threw up a little in my mouth.
You know, on that particular movie, I did not enjoy him in Jack Reacher at all. So.
He was totally good at interviews. Whatever, haters gonna hate. He was totally fine.
Yeah, I'm just a hater.
Accent was
Jack Reacher is this in the books. He's this giant guy. You know, like he describes himself as long gorilla arms and everything. And they cast Tom Cruise.
I don't know.
Jack Reacher is 6'5".
Right. Exactly.
And for Christ's sakes.
I mean, it was a decent movie. I'm not hating on the movie, but I just don't think it was very good casting.
Besides that, I was too busy watching Rosamund Pike to care about Tom Cruise.
You know, with Lady Hawk, haters gonna hate. So.
Yeah, whatever. I'm right. I don't care. I have gotten into so many fights about this, and I have yet to have my mind changed by anyone's argument. Like,
ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the portion of the show where we start dissing on the guests.
I don't even care. I don't care what any of you think because I'm right, so it's fine.
No, I like Lady Hawk, but you're definitely right. It does have some problems. That's for sure.
How many of our viewers remember Lady Hawk?
What?
How many of our viewers remember Lady Hawk? I mean, Conan.
Depressingly few.
No. I'm sorry. I have Lady Hawk on DVD. I actually, one of my, well, in Nightmare's Disciple, I have this book and this, Lovecraftian tome, the True Text, and it was created by Philip of Navarre. So I'll leave it there.
Wow.
Yeah, Lady Hawk
from Lady Hawk.
Yeah, that's where the whole idea for that book came from.
Oh,
it's like Navarre. I gotta use that. And Philippe, it's like, yeah, Philip of Navarre makes perfect sense, you know. So,
Wow, the things you learn on this show.
Yeah, I think the difference between Conan and Lady Hawk can be summed up in that Conan has the Basil Polidori soundtrack, whereas Lady Hawk has, I think, like the Alan Parsons Project, maybe? Is that right, Joe?
that could be. It's been a long time.
And then,
A
of course,
very long time.
there's Legend and what was it, Tangerine Dream?
It was
Oh, everywhere, yeah.
But
Oh,
Legend
don't
is
even
also
say
not
the word
good.
Don't say Tangerine Dream around me. Because once they started to get deep into, after like the 5th album, they sucked. And all that soundtrack stuff. When you listen to them, I mean, they were like this acid shit early on, and then Edgar starts getting soundtrack deals, and he forgot what the hell music's all about.
That's okay. I think everyone involved with Legend forgot what filmmaking was all about.
So Molly and Jesse, are you guys going to be at Necronomicon in August?
I have not planned for it at this time. But
Wow, what a very political answer, even-handed answer.
I mean, something may happen and I may be able to go, but at this point, I'm not planning on it. World Horror is my big being social con this year.
When is that? When and where is World Horror?
Atlanta in May 9th, I think, because it's definitely on my husband's birthday, and I skipped it to go, but he's cool with it, so.
Yeah.
What about you, Jesse? Are you going?
I'm going to World Horror in Atlanta as well. And so far, that's the only thing on my books. I'd really like to do Necronomicon, but again, it may just be a little tricky. I'm also hoping to make it back out to Portland for this year's 25th anniversary CthulhuCon, but we'll just have to wait and see in terms of, the stars being right, ho, 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 that sort of thing. But right now, Atlanta World Horror is the big one.
Cool. Well, we have any more questions for these guys? No? All right.
I don't.
We are doing Waterworld for our current Films of High Adventure, so if anyone has fond memories of sitting through that in the theater. Jesse had never seen it?
No, don't even say those words. Jesus.
I did not watch Waterworld in the theater. No, it was hard enough watching it at home on DVD.
Yeah. I was
Okay,
there.
here's the quote from Waterworld. My boat. You sank my boat.
Yeah.
My boat. Okay.
That was it, yeah. Although Jesse's wife had never seen it either, and she was, like, entranced by it. But she, like, unironically loves Con Air and other, like, movies like that from that era. And so she was like, they jumped ski-doos off of a ramp, and that was all she needed. It was great. Like, she was having the best time, and Jesse was, like, literally looking like a cat going to the vet, like.
Yeah, that's worse than its reputation.
Look, to me, Waterworld took the best parts of the Road Warrior and then destroyed them.
Now that's the movie, The Road Warrior.
But he drank his pee. What do you want? What do you want more than that? Like,
Who hasn't?
Secret ballot.
Yeah, I'm not a Waterworld
Look,
fan.
I'm drinking Fat
No, it's
Tire.
terrible.
You think a little urine's going to scare me away?
hi, see, you're drinking Fat Tire. They're just around the road from me. Look at that.
Are they?
Yeah, they're in Fort
Fort
Collins,
Collins.
Colorado.
Yeah. Okay. I was in Boulder once. Once. I was there for a week one afternoon, and for a conference, and they were serving this bottled water. It was like a Plateau Bottling Company, and we're all drinking it. It's like, oh, it's really, really great water. It's and I finally picked up the bottle and it said bottled in Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's a Boulder experience right there.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, because there's a lot of springs in Vegas. Anyway.
All right, so books we talked about, just Letters to Lovecraft. Your copy will not have this on here, presumably. Edited by Jesse Bullington. We talked about Vermilion by Molly Tanzer, which will be out in about a month. And I'm sorry, what was the name of your novel that you talked about again, Jesse?
The Enterprise of Death.
The Enterprise of Death, right? And I linked to that on the message board as well.
It's the best.
Awesome. I'll check it out.
Really good.
It's good
Yeah.
to know. I haven't heard of it before today, so that's good.
It's my favorite of Jesse's, so I'm kind of biased, but
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it is. It's about like death and ladies, and it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want a copy, we're giving away, thanks to Matt and Jesse, we're giving away 3 copies of Letters to Lovecraft. So if you want a copy of Letters to Lovecraft, please email me with that in the subject.
I just got to say one thing, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
It has to be domestic. For me, the overseas shipping is prohibitive.
That's fine. We're giving away those 3 copies and then one of these. So if you want that, put Cthulhu Coin in the subject. If you want Letters to Lovecraft, put that in the subject, and I'll use random.org to pick the winners as usual. Or rather, random.org will pick the winners, and I'll be the guy that gets yelled at by the people that did not win. And my email address is lovecraftezine@gmail.com. I just put it on the message board. lovecraftezine@gmail.com. So, got anything else to talk about?
You got people complaining?
Oh, what?
You got people complaining because you're using random.org? One of these weeks you send me the names. I'll pick them based on what names I know.
No. Okay. No, I was making a joke. No, but no, you know, if you want to win something and you don't, you're like, yeah, I did win. But no, most people are pretty good about it, actually. So, all right. Well, Molly and Jesse, thanks for being on the show. I hope you guys will come back again soon.
Yeah.
And
Next
next
it was great
week.
seeing you guys.
Yeah.
Now I know what Jesse looks like.
We met in Portland.
Yes, we did. And you saw how intoxicated I was there.
Okay.
That's the place for it.
No, it's
Joe drugged me into a bar, and
No, Joe does not drag anybody into bars. Joe drags people outside of the bar onto the sidewalk so he can light another goddamn cigarette.
Right.
Because
Yeah, let's go talk outside, Mike. Let's go talk outside for a while.
You have all these stupid laws where people cannot just sit and like have a cigarette while they're having a conversation. No, you got to go out into the friggin' outlands. 702 miles from anything that's even dead, so you can light a cigarette.
Yeah, that sounds like Boulder, actually.
It's horrible. Next week we're gonna have Laird Barron on. So anybody, if you have a question that you want me to pass on to Laird Barron, you could also.
We want to know what he thinks of Conan as well as Legend.
And Lady Hawk.
And Con Air.
Oh, and Con Air, yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for
Ask
having
him
me.
right when you start and see if he flips off.
Don't forget Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what Jesse should do for next week. Jesse should compose a list of 10 movies that he wants to know if Laird is thumbs up or thumbs down.
If he doesn't like Big Trouble in Little China, do you think we should have him on the show or not?
I think that's the consensus film here.
I've got a feeling that Laird Barron has paid his dues. Yes, sir, that check is in the mail.
Yeah, actually, he seems very excited about coming on the show, so that's great. I'm sure we'll have a good time talking to him next week. So, anyway, guys, Molly, Jesse, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great seeing you guys.
Good to see you guys, and we'll see everybody next week.